In 2010, earning 50 grand a year meant something. It meant you were doing okay. Not wealthy, not struggling, just stable. You could afford a decent apartment, own a reliable car, buy groceries without calculating every item in your cart, maybe even take a modest vacation once a year. And if you were disciplined, you could save. That was the promise. $50,000 was a respectable middle-class income. Fast forward to today, someone earning that same $50,000 doesn't feel stable. They feel stretched. They feel like they're constantly adjusting, moving money around, delaying purchases, hoping nothing unexpected happens. The number didn't change. The paycheck still says $50,000. So why does it feel different? Why does something that once felt solid now feel fragile? Because middle class was never about income. It was about what that income could buy. And quietly, over the last decade, that buying power has been shrinking. Not dramatically overnight, but gradually, year by year. Rent climbed, groceries ticked up, insurance premiums increased, healthcare got more expensive, car payments expanded. Each increase seemed small on its own, but together, they rewrote the meaning of $50,000. In 2010, that salary gave you room. Today, it often gives you responsibility without margin. You can pay the bills, but you don't feel ahead. You're employed full-time, but you don't feel secure. You're technically middle class, but you don't feel protected. And that disconnect is the real story. Because when people say $50,000 is still decent money, they're thinking about the number. But when you live on $50,000 today, you're thinking about the math. The rent check, the car insurance renewal, the rising grocery total, the unexpected medical bill. Middle class isn't defined by income alone. It's defined by purchasing power. And purchasing power is what changed. You're not imagining it. The lifestyle that $50,000 once supported is more expensive now. The buffer is smaller. The margin is thinner. So the question isn't whether $50,000 sounds middle class. The question is whether it still functions like it. Because in today's economy, earning $50,000 doesn't mean you're failing. But it also doesn't mean you're safe. And that shift from stability to strain is happening quietly across millions of households. Not because people stopped working hard, but because the definition of middle class quietly moved. And most people didn't notice until their budget started feeling tighter than it used to. The math nobody shows. Monthly breakdown. Let's stop talking about the yearly number for a moment. $50,000 a year sounds solid. But nobody lives on per year. You live month to month. So let's break it down. A $50,000 annual salary, after federal taxes, state taxes, Social Security, and Medicare, typically leaves you with somewhere between $3,200 and $3,500 per month in take-home pay, depending on your state and deductions. For simplicity, let's call it $3,300 per month. That's the real number. That's what actually hits your bank account. Now let's look at where it goes. 1. Housing. Housing is the foundation of middle-class stability. In many parts of America today, modest rent for a one-bedroom apartment ranges between $1,400 and $1,900. In major metro areas, it's often higher. Let's assume $1,600, $3,300, and $1,600 remaining. That's before utilities. Add electricity, water, trash, and internet. Conservatively, another $250 to $350. Let's call it $1,700 remaining. We're not even past basic shelter yet. 2. Transportation. In most of the country, you need a car. Public transportation isn't widely practical. The average car payment in recent years has climbed dramatically. Even a modest used vehicle can mean $350, $500 per month. Let's assume $450. Another $150, $200. Let's call it $175. Fuel? $150, $250 depending on commute. Let's use $200. Now transportation looks like this. $450 car payment, $175 insurance, $200 fuel equals $825 per month. Subtract that from the $1,400 remaining. $1,400, $825 left. We've covered housing and transportation, two essentials, and you have $575 remaining for everything else. 3. Groceries, food, is not optional. Grocery costs have risen noticeably over the past few years. A single adult can easily spend $350, $500 per month on groceries, depending on location and diet. Let's use $400. $575. $400 groceries equals $175 remaining. You now have $175 left. And we haven't included healthcare. 4. Healthcare, even with employer-sponsored insurance. Most workers contribute monthly premiums. Let's assume $250 per month, deducted or paid. $175, $250. You're now negative $75. And that doesn't include copays, prescriptions, or deductibles. 5. Phone, subscriptions, and essentials. Cell phone plan, $70, $100. Streaming services, $20, $40. Basic subscriptions, software, cloud storage, etc. $20, $30. That's another $120, $150. We're already below zero. 6. Debt, if applicable. Now add student loans. Average payments vary widely, but $200, $400 per month is common. Credit card minimum payments, another $100, $200, easily. Many households earning $50,000 are carrying some form of debt. That pushes the monthly math further into deficit. What's missing? Notice what we haven't included yet. Retirement contributions, emergency savings, travel, dining out, clothing gifts, home maintenance, medical emergencies, car repairs, pet expenses, childcare. None of it is in the calculation, and yet the math is already tight or negative. That's the shift. In 2010, this breakdown looked different. Rent absorbed less, car payments were smaller, insurance was lower, groceries were cheaper. There was more margin. Now the margin is razor thin. The buffer problem. Middle class used to imply a buffer, a cushion between income and expenses. That cushion allowed you to save for emergencies, contribute to retirement, plan for the future, absorb shocks. But when fixed costs consume 70 to 90% of take-home pay, the buffer disappears. And without a buffer, stability turns into fragility. You can pay the bills, but you can't comfortably handle disruption. One unexpected $800 car repair changes the entire month. One medical bill forces a credit card balance. One rent increase resets your budget completely. That's not irresponsibility. That's compressed purchasing power. The hidden reality, from the outside, someone earning $50,000 looks middle class. They have a job, they have an apartment, they have a car, they appear stable. But internally, the math tells a different story. There's no significant surplus, no meaningful wealth building, no strong financial acceleration, just maintenance, maintaining bills, maintaining appearances. And that's the key distinction. Income alone doesn't define class. Margin does. If your expenses scale up to match or exceed your income growth, your class position weakens. Even if your salary stays respectable. Why this feels so confusing? Because culturally, $50,000 still sounds decent, but economically its buying power has eroded. So people experience cognitive dissonance. They think I earn middle-class money. Why does it feel tight? The answer is in the monthly math, not the annual headline. The number didn't collapse. The cost structure expanded. And when essential categories expand faster than wages, the pressure builds silently. That's why $50,000 doesn't feel like it used to. Not because it's a bad salary, but because the economy around it became more expensive. And when the economy changes but wages don't keep pace, the definition of middle class quietly shifts. Inflation versus wage growth. To understand why $50,000 doesn't feel middle class anymore, you have to zoom out. Because this isn't just about budgeting. It's about trajectory. Over the past decade and a half, Prices have moved in one direction, up, steadily, consistently, and in some categories aggressively. Wages? They move too, but not at the same speed. And that gap between rising prices and slower income growth is where the pressure lives. What inflation actually means, inflation isn't just a news headline. It's not just a percentage on a government report. Inflation is the quiet increase in the cost of everyday life, when groceries cost more than they did last year, when rent renewals jump by a few $100s, when insurance premiums increase without warning, when the same lifestyle requires more money than it used to. That's inflation. And over time, even normal levels of inflation compound. If prices rise 2 to 3% annually for years, the cumulative effect becomes significant. But in recent years, inflation hasn't been mild. It has been elevated. Housing, food, healthcare, insurance, and transportation have all seen notable increases, some of them far outpacing average wage growth, the wage growth reality. Now compare that with wages. Yes, nominal wages have increased over time, but nominal growth doesn't equal real growth. Nominal wage growth means the number on your paycheck increases. Real wage growth means your purchasing power increases. And those are very different things. If your salary rises by 3% in a year, but your essential expenses rise by 6–8%, you are technically earning more, but functionally falling behind. This is the core issue. Wage increases have often lagged behind the cost increases in critical life categories, especially for middle-income earners. High-income earners tend to benefit more from asset growth, stocks, real estate, investments. Lower-income earners sometimes receive policy-driven wage boosts, but middle-income earners, too stable for assistance, not wealthy enough for asset acceleration, and highly exposed to inflation. Housing versus wages. Housing is one of the clearest examples. Over the past decade, home prices and rents have risen dramatically in many regions. In numerous markets, housing costs have grown at double the rate of median income growth. So even if wages increased modestly, housing absorbed the difference. That means your raise didn't improve your lifestyle. It prevented deterioration. That's a critical distinction. Instead of raises building financial momentum, they're often just covering rising rent. That's not upward mobility. That's inflation maintenance. Food and essentials, grocery inflation has been particularly visible in recent years. And food is non-negotiable. You can delay buying a new phone. You can postpone a vacation. You cannot postpone eating. So when grocery bills increase by 20–30% over a few years, that money has to come from somewhere. Often, it comes from savings, or discretionary spending, or future planning. That's how purchasing power erosion works. It doesn't make you collapse overnight. It reduces your margin gradually. Healthcare and insurance. Healthcare inflation has historically outpaced general inflation. Insurance premiums rise. Deductibles increase. Out-of-pocket exposure grows. Auto insurance has also climbed significantly. Home insurance has followed. These aren't optional costs. They are mandatory for financial protection. And when mandatory costs rise faster than wages, your flexibility shrinks. The compounding effect, the real issue isn't any single category, it's the compounding effect across multiple categories simultaneously. Housing rises, food rises, insurance rises, healthcare rises, transportation rises. Each category alone feels manageable. Together, they reshape your financial reality. Meanwhile, wage growth remains incremental, predictable, moderate, so the cost side accelerates. The income side inches forward, and the gap widens slowly. That widening gap is why $50,000 feels different today than it did in 2010. Productivity versus pay. There's another layer. Worker productivity has increased significantly over the past several decades. Technology improved, efficiency improved, output per worker improved. But compensation hasn't scaled proportionally for many middle-income roles. So the economy grew. Corporate profits expanded. Asset values surged. But wage growth for many roles remained relatively modest, which means economic growth did not evenly translate into household purchasing power growth, especially not at $50,000. The psychological mismatch, here's where it becomes confusing. You might receive a raise, Maybe you go from $47,000 to $50,000. That feels like progress. But if rent increased $200 per month, and groceries increased $150 per month, and insurance rose $80 per month, that raise disappears. So you experience effort without acceleration, motion without momentum. You're working, you're improving, but you don't feel advancement. That disconnect creates frustration, because culturally, we associate raises with improvement. But economically, improvement only happens when real purchasing power rises. And for many middle-income earners, it hasn't kept pace with living costs. The quiet shift no one announces when purchasing power erodes. There's no dramatic headline that says, "Middle class redefined today." It happens gradually, year by year, until one day you realize the same salary doesn't stretch the same way. The same income doesn't protect you the same way. The same effort doesn't produce the same comfort. That's inflation versus wage growth. Not dramatic collapse, but quiet compression. The core conclusion: $50,000 didn't become a bad salary. The economy around it became more expensive. And when essential costs rise faster than wages, the definition of middle class shifts, not because people failed, not because they stopped working hard, but because purchasing power determines stability, and purchasing power has been under pressure. That's the macro explanation. The number didn't lie. It just stopped meaning what it used to mean. Housing deep dive, the core of the squeeze. If there's one category that explains why $50,000 doesn't feel middle class anymore, it's housing. Because housing isn't just another expense, it's the foundation of financial stability. And when the foundation becomes unstable, everything above it feels fragile. In 2010, a $50,000 salary could reasonably support housing without overwhelming the rest of the budget. The general rule was simple: spend no more than 30% of your income on housing. At $50,000 a year, that meant roughly $1,200, $1,300 per month before taxes, or slightly less after take-home calculations. In many parts of the country at that time, that was achievable. Today, in many cities, that number doesn't even secure a modest one-bedroom apartment. Rent growth versus income growth. Over the past decade, rent prices in numerous metro areas have increased at a pace that outstripped wage growth. In some markets, rents rose 40 to 60% within a relatively short window. Even in mid-sized cities, double-digit percentage increases became common. Meanwhile, wages did increase, but more gradually. A typical annual raise might be 2 to 4%. Rent hikes? Sometimes 8 to 15% in a single renewal cycle. That imbalance compounds. If your rent increases $200 per month, that's $2,400 per year. To offset that increase alone, you would need a raise of roughly $3,000, $4,000 pre-tax. And that's just to stay in the same apartment. Not upgrade, not improve, just maintain. That's not upward mobility. That's rent stabilization at a higher cost. There's also a structural supply issue. In many regions, housing construction did not keep pace with population growth or household formation. Limited supply combined with rising demand creates upward price pressure. Developers often focus on higher-end units because margins are stronger. So even when new housing is built, it's frequently priced above what middle-income earners can comfortably afford. The result? The affordable segment shrinks, and $50,000 earners compete in a tighter, more expensive market. Homeownership, the shifting dream. In 2010, while the housing market was still recovering from the financial crisis, home prices in many areas were relatively accessible compared to today. Mortgage rates were historically low in the years that followed. Home ownership, while not easy, was more attainable relative to income. Today, home prices have climbed dramatically in many regions. Even modest starter homes can exceed what a $50,000 income can support under standard lending ratios. And with higher interest rates in recent years, monthly mortgage payments have risen substantially, even when the purchase price remains the same. So for someone earning $50,000, down payment accumulation is difficult. Debt-to-income ratios limit borrowing capacity. Monthly payments stretch budgets thin, Homeownership moves from possible with planning to structurally difficult. And when ownership becomes less attainable, renting becomes long-term by default. But renting is no longer cheap. For decades, a $50,000 salary meant a stable middle-class life. Today, for many people, it barely feels enough to keep up. So the real question isn't just about income. It's about why the cost of living has changed so dramatically. And that's exactly what we'll explore in next video. If you found this video valuable, consider subscribing for more videos like this. And don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it.